Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the Gospels, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And today we're looking at Jesus forgiving an adulterous woman. This is one of my favorite stories. There's a couple that I kind of point out as my favorite. This one and the woman at the well, I think are my two favorite parts of the Gospel. And we see Jesus's compassion and the way he is, and just how we should be. And it's such a good example, and we see his true heart and nature. And I love this part of these two stories that we have in the Bible, and we just seeing what Jesus does. So we're going to start. This is in John 8, verses 1 through 11. And it says, Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning he went back to the temple. Again, we looked at yesterday. He was speaking to the temple. I'm sorry, 2 days ago we looked at he was speaking to the temple, and then the next day the religious leaders and Pharisees tried to arrest him, but were unsuccessful in that. So he's going back. And so he was back teaching again. And so a crowd gathered and he sat down and taught him. And as he was speaking, the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery, and they put her in front of the crowd. Now, a lot of the stuff I'm going to go through here, I didn't put in the notes. So if you want to take notes for this one, you can. More than likely, the simple fact is that she was caught in the act of adultery and they brought her to Jesus. So there was a very good possibility that most scholars believe that she was probably naked whenever they brought her and laid her in front of the crowd. And so the other thing here is, and we'll hit this a little bit too, is they only brought the woman. They didn't bring the man, right? They would have both been committing adultery, not just the woman. And so we're going to look into that a little bit. But you got to imagine that Jesus is in the middle of the temple and he's preaching and teaching, and the religious leaders bring, more than likely, like I said, a naked woman and sit her in front of the crowd. One, embarrassing her, and two, calling out her sins publicly to everyone. So they say in verse 4, Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? And so, they're trying to trap him. And it says, verse 6, he says, they were trying to trap him into saying something that they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again. And I want to stop here before I say verse 7. Right? There's now, again, we don't know what he wrote, and we don't know why he stooped down and started writing. There's a lot of scholars that think, well, there's a lot of people who think that, and scholars who believe that, well, because she was naked, that Jesus didn't want to stare at her. And so he looked down and started writing. And again, we don't know what he was writing in the sand. A lot of scholars like to think that he could have been writing the sins of all these people in the sand. But whatever he was writing, he was writing something. He wasn't, and it was for a purpose. And so, and there's obviously a time, right? So it doesn't say how long he was writing, but it was writing long enough to where they continued, they kept demanding an answer. And so he finally stood up and he said, all right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. And so that's why a lot of people and a lot of scholars believe that more than likely he was writing the different sins of all these people in the sand. And then he stood down again and wrote in the dust. And so he kept on writing. And when the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you? No, Lord, she said. And Jesus said, neither do I. Go and sin no more. And so that's an important piece that we see here. So we see this, and again, we don't know what Jesus was writing in the sand. I like the idea that he was writing the sins of all these men that were accusing this lady of adultery, you know. And we go back to the law of Moses. The law of Moses said to stone both of them, not just her. And so they should have brought both the man and the woman that was committing adultery in front of Jesus, if they were being true to what they were doing. And so Jesus sees their hypocrisy here. Jesus sees all this. And so that's why he calls them out. And that's why he says, all right, let the one with no sin throw the first stone. And, and I like the idea that the oldest left first, right? The oldest walked away, but the youngest, because, the oldest probably had a lot more sins that were committed, and they understood that. And so, I love seeing the compassion in Jesus's heart that we see here, where he looks at her and said to her, "Where are your accusers?" He says, "Didn't even one of them condemn you?" And she said, "No, Lord." And I like this part too, right? And Jesus said, "Neither do I." Now, a lot of people like to stop right here. Well, see, Jesus didn't condemn, and so Jesus didn't condemn her. At this point, she had already been shamed enough. She had already been condemned enough. She didn't need to be condemned anymore. Not by Jesus, not by anyone else. She'd been called out on her sin very publicly, very shameful, very embarrassing. And so all he says to her is, "Okay, you've learned your lesson. Hopefully." He doesn't say that. He says, "Neither do I," and I think part of that is because hopefully you've learned. All right, go and sin no more. Just go. Don't. All right, let's stop sinning. I'm not going to condemn you. Just continue to live your life and don't sin anymore. And so the main story here that we see, and then the main part of this is about judging others, right? It's a significant statement about judging others, and so we need to make sure that we're very careful in judging other people, because we're very good at judging people based on their sins and ignoring our sins, right? I don't think we've looked at the Bible verse yet. Jesus says, "Why do you ignore the plank or the log in your own eye, but you're going to point out the speck in your brother's eye?" And so that was, that we get a lot of that's what the Pharisees were doing here. I mean, the Pharisees were plotting to murder Jesus, but yet at the same time they were calling out this woman because of her adultery. And so we do the same thing. We get caught up in doing the same thing of, we want to point out other people's sins so people don't see our sins. And I'll be honest with you, one of the things I've noticed is that the sin that people tend to focus on the most in calling out in others is a lot of times the one that they're personally guilty of the most as well. So we see that a lot, or one they struggle with the most. And so our job isn't to go around, pointing out everyone else's sin. It's to help each other with our sins. It's to help each other with the struggles we can, not put each other down and knock each other down. We're to build each other up. And so as we go through this, right, we see because Jesus upheld the legal penalty for adultery and stoning, he could not be accused of being against the law. Right. So they were trying to trick him, because if he would have said no, they would have said, but if he would have said yes, then, he would be like, "Oh, well, you're having," and so he knew what they were trying to do here. But by only saying that the sinless person, so he's like, "Okay, we'll keep the law, but only the person who's never sinned can throw a stone." And, and so by saying that, he highlighted the importance of compassion and forgiveness, and we need so hard to focus on that. We That's hard. Showing compassion and forgiveness to people can be very hard sometimes, especially people who've sinned against you. That's even harder. But just seeing people who've sinned, seeing people who've done things, it's like it's hard sometimes to want to move past that. But we've got to remember what all Christ has forgiven us for. And so we need to make sure we pass that on to other people. And so the question then is when others get caught in sin, are you quick to pass judgment? Oh, when a young lady comes forward in your church and she's, pregnant out of wedlock and coming forward or asking for help or saying, "Hey, I've sinned, I've messed up." How do you react to that? Right? Is your first thought, "Oh, I'm not surprised. Look at the, way she dressed, or look at the way she behaved," or is it, "You know what? This is going to be a hard time for you. I'm going to be there no matter what. We're going to shower you with so much kindness and love and mercy that you're going to that you would just you'll be so thankful for everyone being here for you." What's the difference, right? What's going to, if someone comes to the church and says, "Hey, look, I messed up," and we condemn them, and we're the Pharisees wanting to stone them, then why would they want to have anything to do with the church, right? But if someone comes forward and says, "Hey, I've really done this, I've really messed up," and we wrap our arms around them and we're like, "Here, we're here for you. We're going to build you up. We're going to, that's okay. We're going to be here for you, and we're going to make sure that everything's fine." Yeah, you sinned, you messed up. Okay, we all have. Every single one of us have. And so if you had that kind of compassion and that kind of mercy, man, what would happen when everyone messed up? But right now, what happens? Someone messes up, the church service is over, and what happened? Everyone's cell phones start, or used to be landlines, and now it's, text messages. It's like blown start phone. Can you believe what so and so did? Can you believe what? And it's not. It becomes a gossip fest. And so this is not how we are to behave. We are to be there for him, love him, because every single one of us has messed up. Every single one of us has messed up. And every single one of us has been in that situation. And so so what we need to do is make sure that we behave and act the way that we would want someone to act whenever if we were to go forward and say, hey, or go in front of the church, or admit to people in the church, say, hey, I've really messed up here. I've really done this. Right. And to see that compassion, the compassion of Christ come out, man, that people are going to see that, like, I want to be a part of that. And so it's God's role to judge, not ours. Right? We don't need to judge. That is up to God, and we just need to show love and compassion and mercy. That's our role, and it's especially to a repentant sinner. And so when Jesus said that someone who had not sinned should throw the first stone, the leaders, they slipped away quietly, right? They dropped their stones, and I just I picture this, I picture all these religious leaders, right, standing around holding stones, ready to just kill this woman because she committed adultery. And I imagine, and again, we don't know historically, factually, what Jesus was writing, but I just imagine them looking at Jesus in anger and in hate, and seeing him writing the sins, their personal sins, in the sand. And again, we don't know if this, but I just like this imagery, and I see him writing it, and these people, these religious leaders, are seeing it, and they see what Jesus is writing, and they know it's them, and they know it's about them, right? And then they look at him, they demand that answer, and he's like, okay, you know, I almost see him looking at it and saying, one of you, who doesn't have a sin, and he just points out that all the sins that he's written in the sand, for these guys to read, and just the impact that would have had. And you see the oldest, right, the old men first, dropping the stones, them hitting the ground, and them walking away, because they know, right? They know that they're just as guilty and as sinful as that adulterous woman is, if not more sinful, right? They put on a bunch of airs, and they put on a huge show to make people think they're they're not, but they were. And so I think we see the age and experience part of this, right? The older you are, probably the more sins you've committed. And so, they it kind of called them out on their self-righteousness that they had. And so we see that Jesus didn't condemn the woman, right? But here's the thing, and this is the big thing we need to, he didn't he didn't condemn her. He didn't, call her out. He didn't do any of that. But he also didn't ignore or condone her sin. He told her to go and sin no more. And that's what we need to do. When someone comes to us and says, "Hey, I'm struggling with this sin, or I really messed up. I did this," it's okay, right? We don't need to get on to them about it. They're already feeling bad enough about it. If they're coming to you, they already feel bad. So what we need to do is be supportive in helping them not sin anymore. And so, not call them out on it, not come down on them, but say, hey, lift them up. All right, we're going to be here for you to keep you from sinning. And that's what we need to do. He told her to leave her life of sin. And that's the one thing we need to point out, is that Jesus stands ready to forgive any sin in anyone's life. But if we're doing that, if we confess that in repentance, it means a change of heart, right? So we can't just, we can't come to Jesus and be like, oh man, I need forgiveness for this, but not really mean it, not be really repentant, and just not change our life. If we're coming to Jesus, then we have to change our life. And so the whole point of this story, and that's one of the things I love about it, was, one, women were treated horrible back in this day, right? They were considered second class citizens, and Jesus lifted women up. Jesus, unfortunately, the church has a reputation for not doing that, and we need to correct that. We do need to correct that. There's some things that we need to focus. I'm not going to go into them in this lesson. That's a study for another time. But there are things, where we still look down on women in some cases, and we need to correct that. But he lifted women up. We see that with the woman at the well. We see that with here. We see a lot of it in Luke's writings of how Christianity, in that they lifted women up. It did not bring them down. And so he does that. He shows kindness and compassion, and especially to those who are remorseful, or he is not about shaming people, right? Shame or guilt, and you never see Jesus use this as a tactic for bringing people to him. He does not shame people to bring them closer. Now, he calls out religious leaders, right? But it's I don't believe it's to be shame or to shame them or to make them feel guilty. He told them and called them to their face what they were, right? And he called them out. But this idea that we need to shame people or guilt people into a relationship with Jesus doesn't work, right? If I'm trying to have a friendship with someone or a relationship with someone, if I try to shame someone into being my friend or guilt someone into being my friend, how good of a relationship do you think that's going to be, and how long do you think it will last? And so we need to remember that, right? If our mode is to make people feel bad and guilt people into becoming a Christian, or shame people into becoming a Christian, or even when they start their Christian walk, we shame them for not doing everything the way we would want them to do it and all that stuff. That's not going to work, right? That's not. It may work temporarily. It may work for a little bit, but shaming people, Jesus never did that, and so we don't need to do that. That's what the Pharisees did, right? That's what the religious leaders of the time did. They shamed people, they embarrassed people, they called people out, and that's not what Jesus did, right? He would talk to people about their sin, but he did it in a very loving and kind way, and that's what we need to do, and we need to be the example now that Christ set back then. That is what we need to mimic. As we go through this, I will emphasize on that over and over and over again. And that's why I think it's important as we study all these verses to look through it through the lens of Jesus, right? Right. A lot of times we focus, we take Jesus's the lens of Jesus out of the picture, and we just look at this. It's a bunch of rules that we have to obey. No, no. If you look at the whole Bible through the lens of as a story about Jesus, and point everything pointing to Jesus and how Jesus was, and we are to mimic that, it makes a huge difference. And so our goal, what we should be doing, is not to be like the religious leaders and the Pharisees in the story, but to be like Jesus in this story. Right? No matter what's brought in front of us, who's brought in front of us, it doesn't matter what their sin is. We are to treat them with love, compassion, love and kindness and compassion and mercy and grace, just like Jesus did here. That's who we are supposed to be. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching. I appreciate everyone for sharing these, for the comments, the questions. As always, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please you can put them in the comment section. You can send them towards us. If this is helpful, please share it. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, do so. We're going to continue to do this study through the 250 events that we get through, and then we're going to dive into some other studies. And so just, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so. And as always, I appreciate you for watching.